Morning. Good morning to our Zoom folks. Looks like we have a few people on there today. I also want to thank our AV team for putting everything together this morning and our folks out doing coffee, getting us prepared for the day. Um, I want to remind everybody that HGP believes strongly in freedom of speech, but I must state that the views expressed by myself, our reader, today's speaker, and HGB members and our guests that today's meeting are not the official views of the humanists of Greater Portland. Humanism is a non theistic philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. Humanists strive to lead meaningful and ethical lives. We use reason and empathy to guide our decisions and actions. We strive to live meaningful lives because we honor the fact that this is the only life for which we are certain. As humanists, we affirm the dignity and worth of all people. We do this not only to acknowledge all that humans have accomplished in the arts, sciences, and humanities, but also simply for the possibility for peace and well being when we cooperate and interact with respect for one another. So, Al Christians is going to be our reader this morning. Al, if you'll go ahead for us.
Lovell, the former astronaut who had been the commander of the Apollo 13 mission to the moon and the only person to go to the moon twice without ever stepping on its surface, died this week at the age of 97. The story of the Apollo 13 is a story of a great escape from danger, of endurance, effective problem solving, of extraordinary determination, one that might give us hope when confronted with multiple adversities that appear overwhelming. After an oxygen tank in the service module of their spacecraft exploded, the three astronauts took refuge in their tiny lunar excursion model. That craft had no seats, for it was designed to be flown standing up with only two occupants. With three inside, none could move without jostling the other two. Lovell was trained to fly the lunar module, and the lunar module's engines were the only ones that were usable to control their course to get back to Earth. But all his training taught him to fly it with nothing else attached to it. During the post-explosion part of the Apollo 13 mission, he had to teach himself to fly it with 30 tons of the command module and service module attached. They fired the lunar module's main engine, which was designed to be used once, 3 times to steer their way back to Earth. The third course correction was done in a hurry because the pressure in that engine's helium pressure tanks was rising, and the essential helium pressure would soon be lost when it reached about 24 times its normal operating pressure. Very shortly after that third course correction was done, they're 200,000 miles from Earth, and Lovell had learned from Houston that they appeared to be on a good course. The release valve on the helium tank let go. Fred Hayes, a member of the crew, was struck by a severe kidney infection, and Lovell reflected on what his crew had already done. They had survived the explosion that crippled their craft. They executed those 3 course corrections flawlessly, one without a computer and a guidance system. They'd flown around the moon. They'd navigated by the sun. They built a machine to scrub CO2 from the air. This was a machine that had just recently been invented on the ground. They had never seen it. They had no screens or instructions with any pictorial content to put it together. They had no idea what it was supposed to look like. All they had was a verbal description, and it required all 6 of their hands to work on it for an hour in order to get it built. And they'd done all this while being cold, very miserable, and very, very tired. And a battery in the lunar module had just exploded. As Lovell was about to drift off to sleep, Houston called and asked him if he would like to talk about some ideas they had for re-entry and splashdown. Of course, he said yes. NASA knew that this would be the most dangerous re-entry and splashdown that they had ever attempted. It could only happen after the service module, which had been completely powered down to allow the astronauts to survive so far, was run for 2 hours, and there was only enough electricity to spend about a half an hour to power it up. Service modules had previously been powered up only by technicians on the ground, and with plentiful power, they took a day to do it. And of course, it was not designed to be powered up in space, and the plan was not complete yet. Somehow it worked. And in addition, please note that Lowell's crew, himself, Fred Hayes, and Jack Swigert, were the only crew to go to the moon and return and never experience a single divorce.
Now I would like to introduce Ralf Jennings, who will be presenting China, what it is actually like. Ralf was born and raised here in Portland, Oregon. He has always worked as a journalist and is currently working for South China Morning Post, scmp.com. He is covering the Chinese economy there, and he will be sharing his experiences with us living in China.
David, thank everybody else for having me here today. It's my pleasure, my honor. And because I also teach on the side, I'm going to start with a trivia question, which is as follows. Here we all are in Portland, Oregon. How long does it take to get from here to Beijing? And how do you get there? Close. 11 hours? Do I have a 14? Anything else? Depends how you go. Can you get a direct flight from Portland to Beijing? Say no. The answer is no. So what you do is you get a flight to Vancouver, BC, or to San Francisco, and then you fly to Beijing. So you probably, 11 hours is pretty close. Could be a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, depending on the winds. If you can get a Chinese airline to take you, then you can still fly over Russian airspace. So you'll see the beautiful scenery from Vancouver, the Canadian Rockies, the Aleutian Peninsula, and even the Kamchatka Peninsula, because they can fly over Russia, and it's pretty nice. And then you land in Beijing. Can an American citizen just show up in Beijing and get off the plane and start running around? No. What do we need? A visa, yeah. And how, or do we? Does every American citizen need a visa? No, we don't. There's a shortcut. If you go in or out through a third place, for example, if you like Japan or if you like Korea, fly into Seoul, spend a day there, have a good time, then you go to Beijing, then you fly straight back to San Francisco, for example. You don't need a visa. You stay 10 days. It's transit. You'll save about $100 US, and a lot of trouble in just mailing your passport to some consulate. Good. All right. So you passed that trivia question. I might have another one. Since we're all here in Oregon, what % of Oregon's exports land in China? And what's the top export from here to China? Nope. Nope.
Immigrants.
Immigrants. No, they come here. Nope. Semiconductors. Of course, exports are ranked by monetary value rather than volume. So, and 25% of Oregon's exports end up in China. So of all the goods that the state ships overseas somewhere, a quarter of that ends up in China. Yeah. So, and that's a 2022 statistic. So the point being that China matters. China is part of us. We have access to it. And I'm sure you all know, many Chinese people have immigrated to this country, including to Portland. And I'm sure all of you know folks who are from China, who grew up there, who come and go. You all buy things from China, so made in China, made for China. If you're elsewhere in the US, we ship a lot of beef, and somebody mentioned wheat, I think. Other agricultural products that they don't grow as much of comes from the US, goes to China. Copper has been in the news a lot because of the tariffs on copper that kicked in here on August 1st, I believe. China takes a lot of copper from the US, for their manufacturing. So it's a big deal. And I guess this is kind of my way of saying we should care about China. We should really, like, it's part of our lives, even if we can't see it. You can still go to a supermarket and look at the made in labels, look at the labels on your clothing or the electronics. And yes, we have tariffs, and the tariffs keep shifting around. They get higher for the most part, but things are still coming in. The two countries are not going to be, my prediction at least, the two countries are not going to be separated by tariffs. Business people are smart. They'll find a way to get around this stuff somehow, and we'll still be trading. So let's see. What are some other reasons you should care about China?
1.5 billion.
Yeah, but they're over there. We're over here. Why should we care?
Control the world.
They might, yeah. We're co-controlling the world with the US, perhaps. So the top trading partner, you're probably going to meet people from China. You're definitely going to eat the food. You can eat it in Portland. You can, out on 82nd or in Chinatown. That's not too far from here. So, and I think it's already happening. I'll tell you that when I visited the US, in years past, like maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, I'd come back once a year, basically, and I'd be talking about China. And it used to be like, people look at me, it's like, that's that weird guy who went to China. Everybody else be sitting there going like, well, not me, I don't do that kind of thing. And now you get a group of, 5, 7, 8 people, Americans, and I say, oh, I've lived in China. I still live in China. And they'll say, well, yeah, well, I did too. Or like, my son lives there, or I have a business there. And that's changing. I feel like there's more connection, more connectivity. I'm not the odd guy out in the crowd anymore when I come back. So even if you may meet Chinese people and you may eat the food, you may do business with them, buy the imports and the exports. If not, then you'll probably know somebody who is involved in China in a personal way, as I am. So what's it like living there? Suppose you do get your visa, or you don't need one. You get off the plane in Beijing. Then what happens? What does that city look like compared to here? Smog, probably smog. Less litter, more smog. Less litter, more smog. Are you familiar with the residential area around Lloyd Center here in Portland? What does it look like compared to the rest of Portland? Is it more dense? More people per square meter, per square mile, per square whatever you want, whatever you name it? That's a little bit more like China. They don't do the single family house thing in the city. Outside, perhaps. It's built up. Still a lot of space. So those streets over by Lloyd Center, they're 4-lane streets, a lot of them. And Beijing is built on the Soviet model, which is surprisingly like a lot of dense urban parts of the United States. And I noticed as I was coming in here today that there was a construction site somewhere near Lloyd Center off of Broadway somewhere, which is not a big deal unto itself, but it started getting me thinking about Beijing, where I lived for a long time before I moved to Taipei and then to Hong Kong. Beijing at that time, at least, was full of construction work and other changes. So for example, if you get to know your local grocer, your local supermarket, your local coffee shop, your local medical center, whatever it may be. And one day you go back and you find it's not there anymore. And suddenly the whole thing is under construction, which is kind of a metaphor I like to use for just fast change, fast urban change, a lot of redevelopment, driven mostly by the government and the companies that it owns. And they sometimes redevelop things for housing, sometimes for commercial purposes, often for infrastructure, some of it more necessary than others. But if you can imagine that neighborhood near Lloyd Center always being torn apart and rebuilt and torn apart and rebuilt, can you imagine the noise, the sound that makes when somebody comes down to your neighborhood street at 1 a.m. when there's no traffic and puts scaffolding over the building right outside of yours? You're going to hear that. And you're going to hear it when they're remodeling underneath you or above you. And you have to find a new grocery store too, because it's closed. So that's kind of like, from our perspective, living there, a couple of things we have to be aware of. What about the internet? We hear a lot about the Chinese internet living here. Can you use the internet in China? Absolutely. Do you have to use it in China? Absolutely. That's how business is done. But forget about Gmail, forget about Google Maps, forget about Google Classroom, forget about G this, G that. You cannot G your way through China unless you have a VPN. And you can get a VPN, but it takes some work before you arrive. Make sure you have it set up so you can get around the firewall in China, which is true. There really is a firewall. Local people will use their own ecosystem, and they use it largely to pay for things. E-wallets, e-commerce, names like Alipay and WeChat Pay. We can also use those systems if we go to China, but you need to set it up in advance with your bank so that your bank can debit money as you pay for things in China. Otherwise, you need to use cash there. People still take cash, but they prefer not to. And local people don't usually use it. So internet traffic, again, it's monitored, it's for real. A lot of times people ask me, are you going to be followed in China? Is somebody going to track me? Do I have a minder? No, not usually. Unless you're doing some very, very sensitive work. And I do journalism, and usually journalists aren't even followed unless we're doing something that they consider to be sensitive. We're not followed usually just because of our profession or identification. Sometimes, but not usually. As common tourists, I would say never. It's not going to happen. You can enjoy your experience. Hotels don't cost much. You can still get a really, really good 4-star hotel for well under $100 US per night. So you can save some money if you travel over there. Things are cheap for the most part compared to Portland, compared to the West Coast and a lot of other parts of this country. If you stay longer, you're going to send your kids to school, you're probably looking at international school. That's going to cost you a bunch, so you save your money for that. And what about the food? So you eat Chinese food here. What about over there? Same thing? Probably not. What kind of differences might you get? Somebody mentioned that China has 1.4 billion people. Can you imagine how many different kinds of food also originate among that size of a population? And it's regional too. I think the US has some of that. If you look at, California cuisine compared to things you might eat in the rural parts of the southeast of the United States, different kinds of food. So China follows that model, and even more so because it's an older country. And before they had communication networks as they do now, sometimes villages would be separated for years by mountain ranges, and they spoke different dialects, often unintelligible dialects, even just living one mountain range apart. So somebody here would speak a different dialect than somebody in the Dalles or in Bend, because they didn't have the communication. So the people evolved differently, the subcultures, different kinds of food, different languages. And they still have these rivalries now. It's kind of funny. I guess, does Portland have a rival within the US? I know like LA and San Diego have this funny rivalry, maybe New York and Washington. So a lot of rivalries within China because of these differences that came up, throughout history. Texas and Colorado, anything else? Who does Portland have a rivalry with? Seattle, okay. We don't have the major league sports teams and they do. What do we have that they don't? I'm trying to remember. Is that a loaded question? All right. So we have better weather than almost all of China, by the way. We do, here in Portland, yeah. So in China right now, being in August, almost everything is super hot and humid, except for the far northeast and some of the high mountain ranges, where you can get a more reasonable climate. And in the other part of the year, 6 months from now, when it's raining and like 34 degrees here, it's going to be raining and 34 degrees there without any heat in many parts of the country, unless you're north of the Yangtze River, where they will give you indoor heat, and they will often mandate that you turn on the heat. They'll turn it on for you in some cases, especially in a government building. And you do get some snowfall. You get a lot of pollution in the winter because of the wind directions and different climactic features around the country. So You could stay reasonably warm in the south. I live in Hong Kong and we get a few cold days, but it's nothing particularly urgent, nothing terribly uncomfortable. We don't have heating in Hong Kong. We have a lot of aircon though, because you really need it. So what about meeting people? So let's say you stay a little longer. Let's say you're even a tourist in China for a few days, a few weeks, and you're going to meet people who are living there, live there all their lives. How do you communicate? How many people speak English in China? Not too many. Your hotel clerks will probably know enough English to get you checked in. People in the airport will know enough to get you past the security check. Or they'll say, you know, ma'am, bags, or something like that. And you'll know what they want because of the context. Meeting people in the street who are not part of the tourist economy, they might speak English if they've studied it, if they need it, if they work for a foreign company, if they've traveled a lot, if they intend to travel a lot, they'll probably be able to speak some level of English. And often they like it. Some people really care about English. They care about their China's international status, and they want to have an international career, possibly in a foreign company, because they pay more than the local company. So English makes sense in that way. It makes practical sense. So if you run into people who speak English, then you can quickly make friends. And a lot of people in Beijing and other parts of China do like to make friends with Americans, in spite of all the political baggage that we have between us. Many people there don't think the political baggage is as severe as we do by reading the media. Some people don't know about it. Some people have a different take on it. And a lot of people are just like us. They see people as people and states as states, and we are different actors. We act in different capacities. It's a bit difficult for them because, growing up in a communist system, which it still is, the teachers, the textbooks, the state media, basically all the official media, teach directly or indirectly what to think about the US, including what to think about American people. And the impression they leave is not positive at all. That said, if you do get to know somebody in China, they don't consider it to be such a sensitive topic. They'll just come up to you and say, so I hear Americans are really lazy. Something like that. Or it only takes half a brain to speak English, and you have to use your full brain to learn Chinese. And these are actually things they're taught, growing up through official channels. But I appreciate that it was hard sometimes to sit at the same table with somebody who's telling me these things, but at the same time, I appreciated they're telling me so that we can talk about it. Find out where they're getting the information. If I have some other information to share, if I'm, yes, I think I'm using my whole brain to speak this language, and if it's such an easy language, how come you don't speak it better? There's other things that would occur to me. But the moral there being that people do care about us. They want to meet us. They want to get to know us for who we are. And I think a lot of people have a certain degree of skepticism about what they're taught, either in textbooks, classrooms, or through the official media. If they weren't so skeptical, they wouldn't be asking. And if they really didn't like us, they wouldn't even come up to us and try to have the initial conversation. And you probably won't have too many in-depth conversations as tourists. But if you stay a while and you do run into somebody somewhere who likes to talk, just random people you might meet in a train or in a restaurant, then those kind of level 2 conversations might take off, and you can get beyond things like, here's your room key. If you were to live longer in China, you would need to rent an apartment. And you're going to find that the apartments there are in fact not small. If you want, the small apartments in Asia are generally in Japan and Hong Kong. They are not in mainland China. They give you quite a bit of space. A lot of the units are new, and that means things work a little bit better than they might have 15 or 20 years ago, when people lived in a lot of Soviet era brick buildings associated with their factories or their schools or wherever else they worked. And you get plenty of sunlight. Beijing And Shanghai and other places get quite a few sunny days, different times of the year. Even if it's cold and dusty outside, you still get quite a bit of sunlight. Does it cost you a lot? Probably not as much as here, but probably approaching Portland prices for rent in a place like Beijing or Shanghai for a nice place in the urban area. What about recreation? What are you going to do for fun? Other than eating the food from all over the country, you'll find a fair number of public swimming pools. Chinese like to swim. They also like racket sports. So badminton, ping pong, things like that, you can play at the public facilities and the private ones. You can join a gym, you can join a club. It doesn't cost you too much. You can get out of the cities by public transit with a little bit of planning and go to the farms, the countryside, the mountains. Lots and lots of people. If you were to go 100 miles to the southeast of Portland and you're buried in the Cascades somewhere, you don't get that same experience if you were to travel 100 miles outside of Beijing or Shanghai. You would see fewer people, but still a lot. You would still see villages, small towns, maybe even some bigger cities, along with the farms and along with the factories of different sizes and dimensions. Lots of infrastructure, lots of railways and freeways and buildings, some occupied, some not, because of the construction and real estate problems that China has had since 2020. Public parks, you get them. You do see public parks in the cities, but they're usually not quite as many as you get here. However, they tend to be large and they tend to have some human-built infrastructure like a pavilion, a network of trails, of paved trails, steps, perhaps a restaurant or a tea house within the park. That reminds me, can you get a cup of coffee in China? Absolutely. If you like tea, you will get your tea, but if you like coffee, you're going to get that too, because the Chinese like coffee. So the Japanese got the coffee thing going decades ago, and then the Koreans got their coffee thing going, and the Chinese have got their coffee thing going too. So never fear, you won't get a cup of coffee. Now, what if you're not a tourist? So let's say you are a tourist and you're there looking around and you see all these other people. Most of them don't talk to you. They're busy. You're busy. You have a language barrier. And you kind of wonder who they are. What are they doing? What gets them up in the morning? What motivates them to go to school or go to work or just whatever they're doing? For a lot of them, family wellness, for lack of a better term. Everybody in the world, I think, cares about their family, but the Chinese have a unique application for that. Extended family matters a lot more on average there than it does here. Often 3 generations will live in a home, if not in the same flat, in the same apartment, then neighboring apartments in the same building perhaps, or at least in the same village. And they will often make decisions, some very difficult ones, sometimes for the benefit of family. For example, one of the parents in a family with kids will leave their hometown for a while, for 6 months or a year, to make more money and can bring it back to their city where they're from, for a better job, to help the kids go to a school. And they do that for their elders as well. And the family provides a security network in a country that has not been very secure over the past 80 years, or many more, in fact, back into dynastic times. You couldn't rely on the government for a lot of social security, any kind of welfare. You couldn't rely on the banks or the healthcare system. So who can you rely on? Well, your own kin. Rely on your family for help when you need something. So treat them well. And when it's your turn to help, you help. When it's your turn to be helped, you get help. Money gets people out of bed in the morning, like it does anywhere else. What is it with money in China that's different from somewhere else? At the end of the day, probably not a whole lot, except some of how should I say this? China is a bit more opaque than a lot of countries because of its political system. So you don't always know what's going to happen from day to day in the financial markets or to your business. If you own a small business, you don't know what's going to happen to it in terms of regulatory issues. And I don't just mean tariffs from the US. I mean also issues within China that affect small businesses, permitting problems, domestic demand, lots of basic commerce moving from offline to online. So these business people have to be pretty sharp. They have to adapt quickly to the changes. Kind of like I was mentioning earlier, the supermarkets are going to be closed. All of a sudden, you have to find a new supermarket as a consumer, or a new dentist, or a new barber, or a new rec center. The business people are always responding to quick changes, and they need to follow the money. In the past, at least, and I think this is still happening, younger business people or even experienced business people will try to set up short-term business plans. For example, I went to a city in the far south of China called Hainan, which is an island to the southwest of Hong Kong. And I noticed a lot of small coffee shops there. And I said, am I in downtown Portland? Doesn't look like downtown Portland, but there's a lot of coffee shops. And it turns out, I asked some people why, and it turns out a lot of younger Chinese are moving to that city because it's warm, it's a tropical island, and they're just starting coffee shops, trying to make a go at it. It's a new thing. And then the overhead isn't too high. And some of them will succeed. Some of them will be bought out by the big chains. And there are some chains forming around coffee in China. And I don't mean Starbucks, I mean their own. And the coffee is just as good, if not better. So business motivates a lot of people, I believe, to just get up, start their day, to express their creativity through making money, saving money, starting a business, closing one, expanding. And you can be very creative in business, just as you can in art or literature or music. And there is money to be made. The Chinese economy is not doing very well at the moment, it hasn't been for a while. But that doesn't mean everybody's suffering. A lot of people are not suffering. A lot of people are doing well, especially if you're in e-commerce. Or suppose you can be a KOL, a key opinion leader on the internet, if you have your own channel, key opinion leader. A lot of younger Chinese aspire to be internet celebrities or key opinion leaders or influencers, to use a more common word. And some of them do very well. They like to travel. China is a big country geographically, much as our own here. They have quick access and easy access to the rest of Asia for the most part, in terms of the passports and legal procedures. And quite a number of people have made a name online by sharing their travel experiences. And then they pick up sponsors who are in the travel industry somewhere. And they can make a go at it that way. And then they're at the ripe age of 24. Not a bad way to go. Many people try it, of course, and don't quite succeed. But because of the strong family network, they can live at home for a while. They can live with their parents in their 20s with not too many questions asked about their business, and keep making a go at it and see if it works. They don't have to pay rent right away until they get married. And that's another thing. If you're a younger Chinese, fewer people are having, I would say, fewer childbirth is down, put it that way. So I think the priority is shifting a little bit away from the family into more of the activities that people would like to do. Younger people are less influenced by their parents in terms of economic activity than they used to be. So if you want to be a rock and roll star, if you want to be a KOL, if you want to travel to Europe and be an artist for a few years, then you could probably do that. Your parents will protest, but they won't protest as much as they used to. You can go ahead and do it if your family is middle class or higher. And most people in China are now middle class or higher. Yeah. It doesn't look like the middle class here, but it is. People have enough to eat for sure. They have homes, they have medical care as needed. It can be a struggle sometimes, as it could be anywhere, but middle class. No, not too much poverty. If you want to see poverty, you have to go a long way out of the city. What else gets people going? So because the population has evolved into a more middle-class society, and it's going to keep evolving upward, I believe, in spite of the current economic conditions. Because of that, a lot more people are focusing on what's fun in life. So they get up in the morning, they focus on their job, their income, their family, but they also focus on other stuff. And you see this especially in the younger demographic, as well as retirees and pre-retirees. They like to travel. They like to eat. They like to live well. They like adventure travel too. They like to camp. They like to get in a car and drive for a couple of days, which is something that's become possible in China over just the last 2 years. And you can drive from Beijing all the way out to the west of China, so you're almost into, Kazakhstan or Afghanistan. It's all China, so you can just keep going, keep using the roads. Cost you a bit because the roads are often metered, they're toll roads. And if you have more money, then you fly to Europe and you can come over here still. It's harder now than it has been to get a US visa, but you can still do it, especially if you've had one before. They'll give you another one. This country will give you another one to come and see the country again. If you have a lot of money, also send your kids to a university outside of China. So here comes the skepticism again among the Chinese about their own system of government and some of the things they've been told about the rest of the world. Somehow, almost everybody knows in the back of their mind, if not the front of their mind, that education gives you a little bit more in this country than it does in China. We have more years of experience cultivating universities. Our universities are subject to less political pressure than the ones in China. And you can take your university degree from the US and apply it back in China, as well as staying here or going somewhere else. It gives you kind of an education passport to the rest of the world. So making money in China is not just about having money and it's about having fun, also about getting education for your kids. And then also just keeps your mind fresh, keeps your business mind fresh. How to make money through business or through the markets. Tell you a little story. I think this goes back to I want to say 2004, 2005, and I realize it's dated, but I think it could still happen again. I was approached as a reporter in Beijing by a family, 2 parents and a 9-year-old girl. And this girl was going to be a superstar artist. She was an artist. She had talent as a 9-year-old, which is not unusual. We all have talents when we're growing up of some kind or another. And our parents probably recognize that as we're growing up. And this girl's parents not only recognize it, they were going to change her whole life. They were going to take her away from the normal public school system to the extent they could and have her study more art, get her more exposure, more gallery dates, and more gallery postings and so forth. And they were coming to me as a reporter to see if I could do a story on her talent. And she really was talented. I was able to talk to other people who understood art, and they said, yeah, she's probably got it going. But it made me think that, this is how the parents were completely focused on what this girl was going to do. They had no other kids because back then you weren't supposed to have other kids, only one. Now you can have more, but then only one. So they focused pretty heavily on her, and everything she did in her life was geared toward being a better artist. At the expense, I think, of some of her normal childhood activities, including education. Got another trivia question for you. What is the official religion of China? Are they humanists? I know that's not a religion, but are they humanists? No, they're not. There is no official religion in China. Is there a preferred religion? Yeah, that helps. Yeah, ancestral worship, Confucianism. They do have some spiritual inclinations. There is no official religion. The Communist Party very much hopes you will respect them more than anybody else and look up to what they're doing. And some people do, and some people don't. So what if you go there and you say like, and you're having a conversation about religion? I really liked it. When I moved to Beijing in 1999, I told people I was an atheist, which I am. And it surprised everybody because they expect Americans to all be Christian. because they're not Christian. So we had something in common from the get-go. I really appreciated that. And you'll find that you have other things in common with people too. Recreation, overall outlook on life. You could have a lot of things in common if you start to converse with them. And of course, if you don't speak the language, and if you have the patience for this, you can pull out your smartphone and do simultaneous interpretation electronically, as you may have done when traveling to other parts of the world. And some people like that. They'll engage you in the simultaneous translation, and you get a lot out of it. Gets the job done. And I work as a reporter, so I do need to interview people in Chinese, and I need to understand what they're telling me in Chinese, and I need to craft it carefully into news articles in English. I don't write in Chinese. I could, but it would look terrible. If you want to learn Chinese in China, then you can certainly sign up for a number of programs, private, public schools. Some of the universities there still eagerly allow foreigners to go and study short-term or long-term. And I think that many people in China have a kind of a split view on foreigners speaking Chinese. They like it because it's convenient and they can communicate without trying too hard. They appreciate that we tried, that we've made that effort to come to them in their language. However, they feel a bit competitive too, like, well, I should be learning your language. So how come you speak Chinese? We're supposed to be a mysterious, opaque country that, we understand you better than you understand us. They want to be the ones looking over the parapet at us and understanding us better than we understand them. And if you understand the language too well, they might think you're cutting it too close. You're coming too close to them.
And 5,000 years of history. Don't forget that.
Oh yeah, no, we won't forget that. And same goes for other things. If you can use chopsticks, sometimes you'll get a bit of a blowback from people there, like, oh, how do you know how to do that? Well, I've been to, down on, Fifth and Burnside eating the Chinese food, and they gave me chopsticks, so that's how I know. And other things, I've known people there who did martial arts, or they've done some of these comedy skits that are peculiar or unique to China. And they're Americans or Europeans, and they get it right. They master the technique, and they get the same kind of response, like, "Wow, the Chinese are impressed, but they're also a bit put off because, like, hey, you're coming a little bit too close." If you think about it from their point of view, it's an insulated. Many of those 5,000, foreigners have come and gone. They were former Western, and they've had quite a bit of interaction with folks in the Middle East. Central Asia, who came over on the Silk Road trading route throughout history. But on the whole, China is inhabited by Chinese people, and it is not a multiracial society. They'll tell you that it is because they have 55 non-Han Chinese minority groups, such as the Uyghurs and the Tibetans, and some others who look more Asiatic. But on the whole, if you're walking down the streets of Shanghai or Beijing, you can walk for, a good kilometer or so before you'll see anybody who doesn't look the same. City where, one it does look like you probably, depending on where you are in the States. So for the most part, Chinese they care a lot about the rest of the world and who we are, what we're thinking, what we're up to, what we're capable of doing. Sometimes it's for national interest because they want to think that they know us better, and they can use that knowledge to improve the country, improve themselves, be competitive against the US. Part of it's because they hear so much about the US growing up, going to school, watching the news. And so they just have this curiosity because they hear so much about it by volume. Yeah. Should we open it to questions? I'm pretty much done. I could go on and on and on, but I don't think that's probably not the best way to do it.
Okay, I'm interested in the communist influences, like the television and the news and all. And also, is there civil unrest, political discord?
The Communist Party's government does strictly control the media, whether the media outlet is state-owned per se, or whether it's privately run. It will be state managed if it's privately run, and they have a lot of controls about what you can publish, what you can't. A lot of vetting goes on. If you read the media, you can read it in English, and you'll see what I mean. You can read China Daily, you can read the Global Times, you can read cctv.com. That's not closed circuit TV, that's China Central TV. And you can see what they do in English, and I think you'll be able to follow some of their themes. So you take a sensitive topic like China-US relations, and the narrative is quite set. Some media outlets have gone against that a little bit, but those forays don't last very long. Sorry, what was the other part of your question? From time to time, yeah, it does come up. When I was living there, I saw it quite a bit in Beijing, because I was living there before the 2008 Beijing Olympics. And during that time, the city government and its construction companies were repossessing and redeveloping a lot of older homes. A lot of the older neighborhoods of Beijing were redeveloped into modern housing and infrastructure and other things. And they weren't paying everybody the price they wanted on their home that was being demolished. So that, among other issues at that time, got people out, small scale protests, like 200-300 people at a time, sometimes more. And I'm not sure if it still happens, because I'm living in Hong Kong. I don't live up north where the civil unrest is probably more likely. It's probably more what you're referring to. So I'm not sure if it's still going on.
And number 2, go.
It's not a question of great social import, but I traveled on a wonderful trip to China about 25 years ago. I know there's been a lot of change, but one of the most charming things we saw there, often on the street, and this is in Beijing, I think, there'd be a little table and a little bitty chair and a kid doing his or her homework. And I just wondered about the value of education overall. In Latin America, parents are just adamant about their kids' education. Is that pretty true about in China as well?
Yeah. So I think what you saw has probably moved indoors over the past 25 years for the most part. But the emphasis on homework continues. Kids from a young age do need to spend a lot of time not only in class, but going to after school classes. And then they'll probably have homework assignments starting from early elementary grades. So they could be reading and writing things from 7 a.m. until dinner time.
Number 3.
What would happen if you walked around wearing a Free Tibet t-shirt?
Walked around wearing a Free Tibet t-shirt. So if you're walking around, if you look like you or look like me, you could walk around for quite a while and people just focus on your face, like you're a white guy, you're from somewhere else. It'll probably take a while before somebody saw the shirt, and they would have to go and report it to somebody, to a public security bureau, or to your hotel clerk or something like that who has contact with public security. And if you were still around, if you were still hanging out where you were seen and reported, they would probably tell you to change it. But if you kept going, if you just kept walking down the street, you'd probably keep going for quite a while. They probably won't look at luggage, and I don't think they'd take it away unless you had a whole stack of them. They would be concerned about distribution, not personal use. Same for books, newspapers, magazines.
Number 4.
I think this is 4 or a 9.
Yes.
It's a 4, okay. You mentioned their middle class is expanding and our middle class is shrinking. Can you talk about wealth distribution? What is the top 5% control compared to the bottom 95 compared to us?
I'm sorry, I don't have statistics on that, but as you say, the middle class is consolidating in China. The number of people who are in abject poverty has come down quite a bit in the past 20 or 30 years due to the rise of manufacturing, primarily in China, export manufacturing, also manufacturing for the large domestic market that they have. The wealth is concentrated mostly in the cities. And if you want to see, if for example, if you go to Shanghai, if you were to land in the Shanghai Chief International Airport and take a train into town or take a taxi into the central city, you would see shopping malls, very much strip malls, kind of like what we have here. You'd see these apartment towers, kind of like the Lloyd Center area that we spoke of earlier. You would see people driving private cars as well as a few taxis out there. So it has the look feel of a very modern and possibly more opulent society if you do that. But if you were to go to, for example, Gansu province or Guizhou province, and they're respectively in the northwest and the southwest parts of China, and you go outside the provincial capitals, you'll see people still living in small single family houses made of bricks or stones sometimes. And they're not necessarily super poor, but they're not doing as well for sure as the people living in the city. I don't know what their average incomes are. It's quite frustrating to get good income stats from China. They do exist and you can get them, but I don't know what they are. If you want to see the difference, I would suggest taking a trip within China. Go to Shanghai first and look at the opulence, and then take a flight over to Gansu or Guizhou and take a bus outside the city and have a look. Just go into a village. It's quite safe, by the way. You can walk around any age, any gender, any nationality. You can walk around anywhere in China without worrying about crime in the streets, maybe the odd pickpocket, maybe. Rural people are super nice. Even if they don't have money, if you strike up a conversation, they like you, they might invite you in for a meal. And you really see how they live. Probably not that well, but surviving. They're doing okay.
A question from Preston on Zoom. He asked, did you see any prejudice for non-Han Chinese?
See any prejudice? I have a friend who's Uyghur, and she has experienced extreme prejudice. Some very severe cases of being detained and held in a jail for overnight. The Uyghurs are people living in the northwest of China, the region called Xinjiang, and they are ethnically related to Turks, the Turkish people, and the language is more similar to Turkish than it is to any other language in China.
And Muslim, right?
A lot of them are Muslim, yeah, probably most of them. Yeah. And you hear about it. When I was living in Beijing, I ran into people from other people from Xinjiang and people from Tibet who would, once they trusted me as a journalist, they would tell me things about what had happened to them. So I think it's real. The problems in Tibet and Xinjiang are pretty real. I don't think they're getting worse. I think it's been kind of a holding pattern for the last 5, 10, maybe more than that years in terms of how they're treated.
Number 5.
It's me. I wanted to know when did China get involved in capitalism? Because I know that they've been going towards it, but in the communist way. What's going on there?
Yeah, the move toward capitalism started technically in the late 1970s under Deng Xiaoping, who was more or less the successor to Mao Zedong, the original Communist Party guy. So he started it out by setting up special economic zones where you could do more capitalistic activity than you could in the rest of China. And things have sort of slowly taken root, taken off since then. The economy today, I would say, well, the state still has a huge role in the economy. They own lots of companies, especially utilities, energy, infrastructure, housing, big stuff. They have big capital intensive industries have historic state backing. They continue to have that. Many other companies, including in high tech, electric vehicles, it might be part state owned. It might be a listed company. For example, they're listed in Hong Kong and it's publicly traded, but the shareholders, if you look at the shareholder distribution, many of them will be state actors in different cases. So I think capitalism is still, it's still I guess they're still experimenting with it, but they're experimenting at a very mature and late stage.
Like all the coffee shops and things like that.
Coffee shops can do their own thing for a long time.
No interference at all.
Eventually there will be, especially if you succeed in your business. If you're selling a lot of coffee, then somebody in the neighborhood will notice that you're doing really well, and you might be asked. You might get a visit suddenly from like the fire department asking about your codes, your building codes, and then whether you've met the codes or not, you might be asked to pay, for the privilege of the inspection, for example. And then if you're doing really well, I think that the different departments of the local governments can come out and say, like, well, you should have a structure in your company. You need to have a board. You need to have somebody from the neighborhood or from the Communist Party who is kind of technically affiliated with your company. Depending on the type of business, the rules will vary, and they will make you. They'll sort of ease their way into your company so that they have a bit of a share in it.
Number 6.
I have a quick question. When we were talking about English, would you say, maybe you don't know, but would you say a city like Shanghai would have a higher percentage of English speakers than, say, Beijing, or is there not a significant difference?
The cities will have more English speakers than the countryside, than the rural areas, because the number of universities normally trends higher in the cities than it would in a smaller province or a rural area. And then you'll have younger people studying at the universities, graduating, going into the foreign companies to work. The foreign companies are normally concentrated in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou in the south, Shenzhen near the Hong Kong line. And English language levels definitely run higher in those cities because of the education dynamic.
Polly on Zoom has asked, how do the Chinese citizens regard our current administration?
Well, full disclosure, Polly's my mother, and thanks for the question. So how do they? It's my mom. Yeah. Yeah, the person who asked the question is my mom, I think, unless it's a different Polly. Yeah. Anyway, so the people here. So the ordinary Chinese looking at today's administration in the U.S., they're actually not very surprised by it because, for one thing, the current president was president before, so they kind of had a sense of who he was and what he was going to do with China, to China. So here it comes again. They kind of know that. I think that many citizens expected America to be more like Trump before Trump came along, because it's more like what they're used to in China. They're used to a very heavy-handed rule by a small number of people, doing things for your own interest, doing things transactionally, very much fits with the Chinese psychology of business and economics. So when they see Trump, they think, okay, yeah, we kind of get that. We've had that here. They've had it seen it in other parts of Asia, and they're not really surprised. Like, of course, you're going to like try to get the best deal for your country. And I think actually some of the the more like the Biden administration or the Clinton administration, I think the Chinese found that a bit more confusing, because even though those administrations were more likely to follow international protocol in terms of negotiations, sitting down at the table, having their committees and their teams go and talk about a bunch of stuff. They had more communication, more contact, but in fact, they were confused by the process, especially when it comes to Americans going back to the US and reporting to their Congress or reporting to some other department in Washington, telling the citizens what's going on, the public hearing process, the 30-day approvals, things like that, where they found it to be a bit frustrating.
Number 7.
Number 7?
That would be Suzanne. Oh, okay. I was wanting to know about your penal system, or what it would take to be put in jail or imprisoned, or what's numbers look like.
To be put in jail or prison. Are you talking about the criminal? You're doing a misdemeanor or felony?
Yes, and, I mean, we're so big on it that I just wondered.
I would say that at the misdemeanor, like minor felony level, you're probably less likely to be prosecuted in China because the courts, the prosecutors, the police are pretty much state run. I mean, everything is state run. It's in every country at that level. But let me try to phrase it differently. So it's a big country and there's a lot of criminals like anywhere as a percent of the population. So how can you process so many people? And what the state cares about is preserving its own power, carrying on, minimizing social unrest, ensuring that people basically like the way things are going in China. So they're going to focus their prosecutions on very, very high level crimes like, rapes, assaults, and murders, and anything that might offend the state. And in those cases, the penalties can be pretty severe. And if the case gets into the media, into the domestic media or even the foreign media, like some kind of a murder, like for example, I think last year there was a driver in southern China that killed 35 people in his car. And they really went after that driver. I'm trying to remember the details of the case. Don't quote me on that, but that was a high profile case. And they were pretty keen to figure out what happened and, get to the bottom of that. Sometimes there's a fire will break out at a hospital or a factory and they'll go after that pretty carefully and find people and prosecute them, send them to jail, kill them in some cases, and they'll make a big deal about it to show people they care. But when it comes to lower level crimes, I think a lot of it just goes unpunished. The police are not actually chasing criminals actively. They're not putting together huge files on small cases. Unless you offend somebody in the government, offend somebody in the party, offend somebody with connections, and then they will ask the police or whoever else to make a case against you. I was always surprised living there how often, you could park illegally, drive illegally, you could drive on the sidewalk sometimes to get around the rush hour traffic, and nothing would happen. And I was thinking, this is supposed to be an authoritarian state, but it doesn't matter. Same for building codes. So when the fire department finally does inspect that successful coffee shop that we spoke of earlier, they probably will find some violations because nobody else is checking up until that point, because they just don't normally do it. That kind of violation doesn't threaten the rule of the party or the social fabric of the country.
Number 8.
Okay, post-COVID, has their safety protocol in their technological industry or their medical industry, has that been improved any as a result of that?
I don't know. I'd like to think so. China had a unique experience with COVID, as you all know, I'm sure, reading the news. And they came out of the cycle relatively late. They had several severe lockdowns in 2022 when this country and many others was pretty much stepping out of the whole thing and moving on. And I think they learned a lot about trying to control people during a pandemic, and they probably wouldn't do that again. But I suspect they probably would repeat some of their controls on vaccinations and PCR testing, things like that. If another pandemic came up, or if there's another threat of a pandemic, I imagine they would go very hardcore on the health side of it without trying to control people's movements. But I don't know what they're doing in the hospitals. I don't know if things have improved at that level.
Movement in there to hinder them?
Some older Chinese people actually like vaccines at all. It's not a political issue with them the way it might be here. But some people do believe that vaccines will harm your health, so they don't do it.
And number 9.
Talk a little bit about the new areas, new districts that are coming up, the government's policies towards them, people's attitudes towards them, and the prospect of increasing the middle class and what people's attitudes are towards the increased surveillance.
Right. Say new districts, I'm assuming you mean districts like the Xiong'an area near Beijing. So The new districts I see them as being kind of an offshoot of the older special economic zones. They're not special economic zones. They don't have the same rules and the same purpose. The way I see them now, the government and the builders and the contractors and developers are going to be the first to benefit because they're building a lot of stuff. And China almost always comes up with the infrastructure before they come up with the software or even the demand at the end. So supply usually precedes demand in China. They're good at it. They have lots and lots of companies who can do engineering, can do construction, and they'll build it up, and they'll build it up well from a purely technical point of view. Whether people are going to move in probably depends on whether they can get the same experience as they could in an inner city. I think at the end they're going to need to have some kind of an organic reason to be there. Like, does it make sense? Do they have a river? If they're going to be doing, logging, for example, they're probably not going to do that. If they're going to be doing high tech, do they have enough? Do they have universities? Do they have just enough talent to draw from? Do they have a water supply if they're doing chips, if they're doing wafers? There's just certain things you need to have that you can't really create. You just have to have them there. And I suspect that those new areas will take off if they have the organic supply for whatever industry they're trying to promote. Otherwise, they won't. Otherwise, we get more ghost cities, ghost towns without lots of fancy stuff, but nobody there.
Number 10.
Yes. There are a lot of things that are several things that are associated with China by Americans, things like traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, feng shui, etc., for which evidence or support has not reached the United States in sufficient volumes for us to think that they could possibly believe in all that stuff. What is the Chinese attitude to those things?
For the most part, the Chinese people who have mastered those techniques and those fields, those disciplines, feel quite proud of it, and they would like those to be more widely accepted around the world, not only here but in other countries. And they will go to conferences and publish research papers and do their best to expose their practices to the rest of the world. You probably get a few people who think it should be conserved more in China and instead of spread around, but I think that would be a minority faction. Why people here don't pick it up, you'd probably know more than I would about it since I haven't lived here in so many years. That said, I think, it goes both ways too. The Chinese are accepting a lot of Western ideas about medicine, especially, and sometimes about even things like home design, which would be, when you say feng shui, you mean how your home is built and where it faces and what you put in your doorway, that kind of stuff. Yeah. What do you think? Why don't Americans buy into it?
Well, a lot of Americans do buy into it, but people in the humanists who have high standards of scientific evidence usually think it's hokum.
Hard to say what the scientific evidence will hold. I do believe from what I've read, it is rooted in fairly strong science. A lot of the medicine that comes out of China, the medical practice, medical theory, they aim to prevent disease. They aim to maintain our health rather than to cure or treat diseases. And a lot of them would prefer to get a Western treatment for a serious disease. Not everybody, or they might do both if they have a really serious disease, see which works better.
And number 11.
But I'm curious about family. I know there's been the one child rule. What kind of support do women have for working outside the home or financial? Just how does the family work with this history of one child?
I think when it comes to women working, communism has done really well by women on the whole. They, from the early days, communist China encouraged women to work, and they did. They went out and worked. They wanted gender equality, and they've made a lot of headway in getting it, and especially when you compare it to more conservative parts of Asia like Japan and South Korea. And women still work. It's almost, the assumption is that a woman will work just as a man would. Women will go to university if she wants to and get a job if she wants to, just as a man would. In terms of who takes care of the one child, or now he's, 2 or 3, if both parents are working, probably the grandparents. The grandparents will live, if not in the same home, possibly in the same city, same neighborhood. And they like it. Grandparents like doing that. It's something they look forward to in retirement.
Is there work day?
If you work for a state agency, work for the government, probably 8 hours with a nice, comfortable lunch break. If you work in a private sector, it could be a lot more. Depends on what you do, depending on your role in the company, how much of a material stake you have in it.
Number 12.
That might be me. Just to go beyond what I was saying, I got the impression that there was more new areas much further away from the cities that were being built. And the way it was getting across to our public was that this was really just ridiculous. Why would they do that? Is that true? Or...
I'm sure if you're talking about the same new areas that you were speaking of a little bit earlier, I don't think there are that many. Like, there's one near Beijing called the Xiong'an New Area. I don't think China has a lot of those, or at least they're not showpieces the way the one near Beijing would be. You may be thinking of new towns, like just basically just like cities that are built out of nowhere. And again, if they're built in the right places, and if the economy is doing well, those towns can do well also. For example, there's a new town that I went to in a tourist destination called Dali. It's in southwestern China, Yunnan province. Dali is a tourist city. And you can go to Old Dali or you can go to New Dali. New Dali is, looks the way you would think it was given the name. You can get, you see higher buildings, more modern architecture, a few hotels. A lot of local people would prefer to live in a new city because the construction quality is higher. You have better plumbing, better electric system, better, insulation, heating and aircon and all that. So local people, certainly of a generation, probably my generation, would prefer to live in that kind of accommodation. So those new towns have taken off. They have succeeded in the past. Problem being that in the last, especially the last 5 years, but more than that even, some of them have been built in the wrong places. They've been built too fast. They've been overbuilt. And the developers didn't think about supply and demand before they did it. And I think that's what you see in the media.
Do we have time for more? Yeah. Okay. So number 13.
Yeah. So, I send money to Ghana regularly, and I've noticed that in March or so, when the Trump administration was coming into power, the rate was 15 to 1, and now it's 10 to 1. So the dollar has weakened considerably. Has the dollar weakened considerably against the Chinese currency, the yuan or renminbi? I'm not sure the exact term.
Your second question first, yes, the exact same meaning, referring to the Chinese currency. The currency fluctuates quite a bit within a range that's set by the monetary authority in China. And I believe that this year to date, it has appreciated. It usually appreciates a little bit. It goes to the higher end of that band when the US dollar depreciates, especially if you're pegging one to the other. If you're doing trade between China and a US dollar denominated economy like this one, of course, you'll notice it. China, as a government, their monetary authority, the People's Bank of China, hopes to keep that currency in a very tight band. And if they need to err somewhere, if they need to make a cut, they'll prefer to keep it low for the sake of their exporters, so they can make money in a foreign currency, send it back to China, convert it, get more on the deal there.
I think we have one more.
Yeah, the culture of China, it seems, as I understand it, has made a pretty big effort to make what happened in Tiananmen Square a non-event. And there seems to be an effort going on here to make January 6th a non-event. Do you think there's any parallel? Do you think that's a bridge too far?
I think it's probably a bridge far. 1989, obviously, that many years ago. We don't know how many people died that day, and the evening of June 3rd going into June 4th. You can read all kinds of different figures on the internet, some more reliable than others. But clearly, it was, a lot of people were shot, a lot of people died, and they were unarmed. They were protesting. China has, we have the same party in China ever since 1989 until now, unlike this country, which switches between parties, between administrations. So I think that here the Democratic Party is probably going to talk a lot about January 6th, whereas the Communist Party is never going to talk about June 4th, 1989, as long as they rule, because it just makes them look bad.
And I think we're going to do number 15 and then over to announcements.
Is China going to invade Taiwan?
I don't want to guess. I would say no. Is China going to invade Taiwan? I would say probably not. I lived in Taiwan for 15 years, and I certainly hope they don't. And I think there's a lot of options they haven't explored, a lot of things they could do. One's a blockade, one would be an ultimatum, another wait for the political party to change in Taiwan to one that's more friendly toward Beijing. And I think Beijing moves a lot more slowly on that issue than we imagine. They don't want to make a miscalculation. They certainly don't want to invade if they don't have to. And I don't think they have to. And I think they kind of know that they don't have to. However, several things could change that dynamic. One is the Taiwan government changing its constitution to declare itself legally independent from China. They've never done that. Still, the Taiwan Constitution, or the Republic of China, depicts Taiwan as a part of China, but they just call it the Republic of instead of the People's Republic of. If they were to change that constitution, just cut that part out, China would probably attack. Or they give them an ultimatum or a blockade, or one followed by another by another. Another possibility would be a lot of US military presence in and around the island, because Taiwan has a pretty well prepared military, but it's a small island. And the US is the #1 military power in the world by most measurements. So who's China going to be afraid of? And somebody asked earlier, or my mom asked about Trump and administration. I think China feels a bit more skittish about Trump when it comes to Taiwan, because the Taiwan policy from this country hasn't really been, it's not as clear as it was under Biden or under Trump 1.0. It's becoming clear, but it's not as clear as China would like it to be.